Welcome back to Build a Neuro Ninja. So in this longer video we're going to be exploring mind management in times of change. And this time of year in schools there's a lot of change. We're all shuffling up classes, some of us are changing schools, some of us are moving on to college or possibly even university. So there's a lot of change, and if we don't understand how our brain responds to change and what sets it off, we can end up suffering because of the way our brain responds to change. So the first thing we need to know about our brain is there's a worry system that is designed to respond to changes in the environment. And when it spots a change in the environment, it activates, but it activates in a negative way that can be quite upsetting. The second thing we need to know is that worry system presents information to us not as it is, but with a negative spin. So if we're looking back to difficult events in the past, we'll think more about the negative things that happened. If we're looking forward to new experiences, while we may be excited, the brain will take a more negative view of potential difficulties in the future. And even in our day-to-day experience, the brain will remember much more the problems and the difficulties we experienced rather than the positive experiences we had. Have you ever been in a hall of mirrors? As you've looked in the mirror, your image was distorted. You were tall, you were wide, you were really small, your arms and legs were different proportions, or you were wiggly. And the reason for that is because the light bouncing off the different shaped mirror is bouncing into your eyes in different angles, presenting information to your brain in a weird way. In a similar way, the brain doesn't present information to us about problems in the past or new experiences in the future as that information is. It presents it in a distorted way. And we don't see the world as it is right now. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as the brain presents it to us. For example, the information coming into our eyes, the light, arrives to create an upside down image with the areas around the edge being blurred. What the brain does as it receives that electrical information, it decodes it, it flips the image over, it fills in any gaps, it removes the blood vessels and the blind spot, which are all around the retina, where those are the light sensitive cells in the back of the eye, and it presents you with an image that feels clear. It does more than that. Your brain takes all sensory information that's coming in now, the sound, the feelings, and binds that all together. That information doesn't arrive together as one source of information. It's decoded by your ears, by your eyes, but it's bound together to create this illusion of a single unified experience, like watching some kind of inner movie. But it's really important to unpack what the brain is doing rapidly. It is exploring lots of sensory information. It is gathering that information together, but it's also doing something else. It is trying to predict what it's going to see, what it's going to hear, and it uses previous experiences to do that. So half of what your brain does to build the world is prediction. The other half is processing sensory information. Brains don't see light or hear sound. They just process electrical signals along nerve cells and interpret those signals. Now that's important to know, particularly when the brain is experiencing change. Our brain processes the world through biases, and if we don't know about these biases, we can end up suffering lots of negative thinking, particularly when there's lots of change. Our brain uses things called heuristics, or basically assumptions. They're shorthand ways of processing the information that the brain has developed to save energy and to maximize survival. So the world is very complex. The brain lacks time, data, and resources. It applies a mental shortcut, and that creates a quick, short-term solution. But that mental shortcut doesn't necessarily represent reality as it is, and we need to rethink that shortcut sometimes and understand we're looking at the world in a biased or distorted way. Change is particularly hard for the brain. Key parts of the brain assume the worst about change because that kept our ancestors alive, and change always activates the brain's worry system. So we ask children, all the different children that we support, what they worry about the most at this time of year, and they tell us these things. changing class, meeting new people, when they go to a new school, getting lost, the homework level in the new school, connecting with all those new teachers. When we ask students what they worry about most at this time of year, they say exams, the work getting harder as they step up to GCSEs or A-levels, moving sets in terms of test results, will they move up or down, keeping their friends, the option choices they've made, and their little brother or sister coming to the same school that they're at as they move up from year 6. So we might find ourselves excited about the opportunities that are coming at us, and we probably will, but at the same time we'll also find ourselves nervous. Our brain will generally focus on what might go wrong, and it does that for a reason I'm going to explore in a minute. It's a little bit upsetting. It does that in a way sometimes that can cause us to suffer, particularly if we don't know the brain's worry system works that way. So what has worried you this week? Think about the future. You will be worried about the changes that are coming. The end of the school year is coming. That's fantastic. There's the summer holidays to look forward to. But after that, your brain will worry about the future experiences of next year because there will be change. And that is important to understand, that our brain does worry about change. So when there's change in the world, an area in the old brain, in the middle of our brain, level with our ears, called the amygdala, starts talking to an area at the front of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. And the conversation can be a little bit upsetting. It is strongly emotional, generally negative emotions, and change and problems cause the amygdala to communicate with the prefrontal cortex using strong negative emotions and thought types or flavors of thought called cognitive distortions. These are assumptions. They're jumping to conclusions. They're catastrophizing. They're assuming the worst. When I go to a new school, I'm going to get lost. When I start my GCSEs, I won't be able to cope with the homework. When I move to college, it's going to be really difficult and I'm not sure about that A-level choice I made. Our brains focus on the negative possibilities, and they look at those future experiences through a distorted sense called a cognitive distortion. Remember, we talked about those mirrors earlier. You're looking at the future and you're focusing much more on the negative, and there's a particular reason for that. The reason our brain focuses on the negative is because of this situation here. Now, we're clearly not warthogs, but we have a mammalian brain, and a warthog is a prey species, and we are a prey species. So this warthog is at a watering hole having a drink, and there are predators around. This crocodile submerges itself, and the warthog can no longer see it, but what the warthog can see is the surface of the water, and you can see the surface of the water is moving because of the wind. But the submerged crocodile will cause those ripples to change slightly, and it's that the warthog notices. And its brain negatively predicts that change in the ripples means that there's a life or death situation. It assumes negative, and it runs, and it gets away. So it takes that negative prediction, and that's what kept it alive. Our ancestors that assumed the worst, that noise in the woods is a predator, run, got to live. The ancestors that said, oh, don't worry about that, it's fine, they got eaten by whatever was in the woods, and therefore we're all evolved from ancestors whose worry systems assumed the worst. And that's what happens when there are new experiences. Our brain will assume the worst often, and we need to know it will do that. It's important to know that our brain's predictions can be wrong. Look at this visual illusion. Both those images of foxes look to be slightly different colours, but they are in fact the same colour. And if I take away the background, you can see that they're the same colour. The changing colour of the background tricks certain parts of the eye as it's processing that information, and the visual cortex that's generating that information. The different shading causes the visual cortex to assign different weightings of colour to those foxes that aren't actually in the image. If I take the image away, and I promise you I haven't manipulated that, you can see they are in fact the same colour. Look at this weird snake illusion. If you look at it slightly at an angle, don't focus on it, you'll see that it appears to move. That is so strange. Only bits of it appear to move, and the reason for that is the areas in the visual cortex that process the different colours of those images respond at different rates to the different colours, and it's those differential responses that we see as movement, but only when we're not looking directly at the image. If we look directly at it, it stops for the area that we've looked at, but the other areas around the edge start to move. That image is absolutely static. It is not moving. So our brain's predictions can be wrong, and these cognitive distortions can be wrong. I'm going to get lost. I'm not going to be able to cope with homework. I'm not going to be able to deal with my GCSEs. They are cognitive distortions. They are not necessarily true. They are negative predictions about change, because that's what the brain system does. So we as neuro ninjas need to respond with flexibility and responsiveness. We need not to believe everything we think. We need to recognize that when we're having a big emotional amplified reaction, we're experiencing cognitive distortions. They may not necessarily be true. Why does this happen? Why does this happen so much in the 21st century? Because there's so much going on. Our brains are bombarded with change and choice in a way they didn't used to be. Just think about what you'll experience in a typical weekend in terms of the things that you've got to think about. What homework should I do this weekend? What shall I wear? What will I eat? What will I study? What will I do? What will I drink? What should I post on social media? Who should I follow? Where should I go? Choice and change coming at us from an information pipe called the internet at a rate that our great-grandparents might have experienced that level of information in a year. We experience it in a day. That's one of the reasons you see an upswing in mental health issues, because our brain is being bombarded and overwhelmed. Just 40 years ago, there were 3 channels on TV. Now you'll know hundreds of channels, loads of streaming services, YouTube. We end up being drowned by choice, and our brain can become frazzled as a result. Compare that with the African savannah 50,000 years ago. Where should we hunt today? Where should we gather food today? That's it. There was not this incoming information. So we experience a lot more information, and that can lead us to feeling overwhelmed. We're in the middle of a well-being crisis as a species. 10% of children and young people have clinically diagnosed mental health problems. Nearly 1 in 3 adolescents will experience some sort of anxiety, and anxiety and depression in children has doubled. Deeply upsetting, and there are lots of complicated individual reasons for that, but one of them is that we're not understanding what we are. We're behaving as if we're a mind bossing around a body and a brain, and there's little connection between them, but we are in fact a brain and a body that generates a mind. And when our brain experiences change, and you've just seen the level of change our brain experiences now is massively different to what it used to experience, we end up feeling overwhelmed. We don't look after ourselves. We end up in this space of frazzlement, which means in the 21st century, we can end up in a space feeling very overwhelmed all of the time, because it's a volatile environment. It's an uncertain environment. It's a complex environment. And it's an ambiguous environment, and there's lots of change around us. So our brain will go off, the worry system goes off. We moan when we spot those worries. We groan, and we can end up in that moany, groany dialogue. So what can we do about cognitive distortions? When we're having cognitive distortions, the most important thing is we notice those cognitive distortions, and we ask ourselves, what was the thought? We attach a label to that, apply a cognitive distortion label to that, and we transform that thought by thinking about it in a different way. Get somebody else's perspective. Ask ourselves the question, really? Is that likely to happen? You know, when children go to a new school, do they get lost? Or does the school come up with an arrangement to make sure they don't get lost? Just give ourselves some perspective. And also, at the end of the day, think back positively every day over our experiences, so we can fire some positive circuits as well. So ask yourself at the end of every day, one thing you're grateful for, one thing you learnt today, one thing you achieved, one thing that delighted you, one experience that was positive, one new experience. Most of the problems we face in the 21st century are complex and difficult. Our brain's instant worry system, with its cognitive distortions, doesn't really cut it. We need to give ourselves more time. Most of the problems in the 21st century are complex. Most of the problems in the past were pretty simple. You could run away from it. You could throw things at it. You could avoid it. You could hide away from it. Nowadays, you can't do that in relation to GCSEs, in relation to the complexity that we're facing. So what can we do to help ourselves? We need to connect. When we're feeling worried, we need to connect with how we're feeling right now and notice that we're worried, because that is a clue that our worry system's gone off. We need to observe cognitive distortions and not just believe them. We need to be open and apply perspective and talk to other people about how we're feeling, and we need to lean in and learn. We need to hold on when we're having a really tricky moment. We need to hold on because pain ends. We need to apply hope. We need to just say to ourselves, wait a minute, is this likely to happen, this really negative outcome I'm thinking about? We need to apply hope in the sense of have our helpers to hand. Who can we ask? Make optimistic choices to build opportunity. Prepare and plan our response, and then engage with enthusiasm in the moment and in our response. We need to say to ourselves when we're in a difficult moment, when we're stressed and worried, this too shall pass. These 4 words are incredibly important. This too shall pass. I will feel better. It will be better. Life is a sine wave. There are ups and downs. To respond to change differently, we need to connect with how we feel right now, observe cognitive distortions but not necessarily agree with them, open our thinking to new perspectives, use that what framework, lean in, apply hope. You can do this. Change is part of the human experience. Change is part of life. You're living in an incredible human brain. It can cope with change. Thanks for listening.